This is Monocle on Fashion, a show on Monocle Radio offering exclusive insights and global perspectives on the fashion industry. I'm Natalie Theodosi, your host and Monocle's fashion director. On today's episode, we're traveling to Cannes to speak to costume and set designer Catherine Martin, the brilliant creative mind behind some of the most beloved movies in recent history, from Romeo and Juliet to The Great Gatsby, Elvis, and Moulin Rouge. Throughout her career, she has won 4 Academy Awards, 6 BAFTAs, and a Tony Award, and she often collaborates with her husband, the director Baz Luhrmann, you may also have heard of him too, to create real magic on screen. But this summer, Martin has been taking some time off the costume department, taking on a different type of project and stepping onto the spotlight. She has joined forces with Miu Miu, following a long-standing relationship with Miuccia Prada, to design the brand's annual Miu Miu upcycled collection using vintage and deadstock fabrics. This is the first time Martin might have designed for daily life, yet her rich history of fashion and passion for clothing meant that she was more than equipped for the job. Her line is heavily influenced by the 1920s and 30s and is filled with playful contrasts, tailoring and nautical tops, mismatched with delicate slip dresses and lingerie-inspired garments. When we met at her suite in the Hotel Martinez, she tells me why she loves juxtapositions when getting dressed, plus why she felt so compelled to look back at the Roaring '20s. We also speak about her directorial debut, Les Grandes Envies. As she was designing the collection, a story naturally formed in her mind, so it only made sense that she would also create a short film to accompany the launch. Catherine takes us to the film's setting, an opulent chateau in the south of France, and tells us about her initial apprehensions around putting the director's hat on for the first time, plus the eventual joy and satisfaction that came with stepping outside her comfort zone. Something we can probably all learn from, even if we're far away from her world of Hollywood movie sets. Let's hear from Catherine Martin.
The artistic director of the campaign, Edward Quamby, who works on all the Miu Miu campaigns, said to me, what can I do to support you? You have to think about what you need to be able to do your work. And I think it was something echoed by Baz as well. And I think it was a really interesting exercise as a woman to kind of say, no, I really want this director of photography. Not that Miu Miu in any way fought me, but, just having the courage to step up and go, no, I think I am going to need this movement coach just to help me with the dancing section. I think we're going to have to do this. I think I'm going to need 3 days or 2 days or whatever. So I think it was a really good lesson in protecting the process, because I think sometimes women do themselves a disservice because we're always kind of making do. I really notice it. So I work in both the scenery side of filmmaking and in costume. And we have a lot of conversation about this in the costume department, because you go to the structure, I go to production design structure, and because it's a very male area, there's somebody to do every job. When you go to the wardrobe area, you go, we do all the jobs.
You're doing everything.
We do everything. And I think that what I've taken away from this, especially going into our next movie, is to go, hang on a minute, it's not that you need to be extravagant or egotistical or any of those things. You still work within the boundaries of good behaviour and budgets and whatever, but there's no crime in asking what you need to succeed. And I can't believe that I'm 60 and this idea is finally in my brain. And my husband has been telling me this for over 30 years. And I just think this has been a really good project to kind of get me, because I was so scared that I wasn't going to deliver and make Miu Miu happy and Mucha happy. I just couldn't afford not to ask for the things I needed. And luckily, the Miu Miu and Prada family are so supportive. They were the first people to go, yeah, absolutely, great. You know?
So interesting that aside from the creative process, it was almost like a life lesson as well, get to doing this and putting yourself out there.
Yes, it was totally the two things together, and really good to challenge yourself. You know, I'm really enjoying this part of my life after, you know, my children now go to university, so I'm less responsible. And you realise that as a working woman with children, it's just a lot. Yeah. But you don't realise it at the time. And now I feel like I'm in a whole new phase of my life, because I can really focus on just the work. And it was really creatively fulfilling. And good to realise, because sometimes I think in my head, you know, that I'm still 25.
We all do, I think.
Like, do you know what I mean? Kind of fighting for my position in the firmament, not quite knowing what I'm supposed to be doing. And then you realise, oh, that's actually super healthy, because it means you're always going to everything as if it's completely new, which is, I think, is really good. But at the same time, you do have skills which you can use. So, yeah, I loved it from a creative perspective. And, you know, I forget, because we make movies, they take such a long time to make, that I forgot how much I loved being on set too. I love the energy of the set. You know? And
since you said the starting point was the collection, maybe we can, before we talk about the storyline and the film itself, we can start there, because that's also a different task, right? Designing clothes that are going to be in the Miu Miu shops around the world versus for a film. So how did you kind of switch your thinking with that?
Well, the film was something that came later.
Yeah.
So the very first thing was that Mucha and the Miu Miu design team wanted to approach the upcycle project in a different way. So they didn't want it just to be, like, usually it's, we found beautiful kilts, we're going to upcycle them, or beautiful leather jackets, we're going to upcycle them. They wanted to be much more story-based. And so they wanted me to think of a kind of a world, a visual world, in which there could be characters that they could costume for upcycle. And so I proposed a number of, I think Caroline, who's the head of product, called them imaginariums, which I absolutely love that word. And then one was picked, which was this story that you see in the movie. And in order to flesh out who the characters were, to get costumes that would eventually become SKUs for the collection, I had to keep working on the story. So the first presentation to Miu Miu was like a visual diary. I wrote the little trip to the south of France as if it was from the writer's perspective as their daily diary. And then it was illustrated with collages, images from the period, Photoshop, little written artifacts, all put together in a deck. But then, as we had to start teasing out, well, who are the characters in this story? What are they like? Who are they? So that we knew what we were going to do in terms of the outfits. The story just kept evolving, and the script kept getting longer, because in my mind, the only way I knew how to work out who these characters were was by doing that. And out of the deck, we found that there were recurrent themes like marinière, like striped t-shirting, and lingerie, and rowing blazers, and men's evening wear, beach pajamas, and foulard tops. Like there's a very famous Molineux image of a woman in a foulard top. And as the script just kept getting evolved and we had to keep costuming all our characters, I think both the design team and Mucha thought, hey, we've got a script, why don't we make a little movie? And then those clothes were taken by Lotta. She became kind of, inverted commas, the costume designer. And I was the director, and I had to kind of say, these are the groups I think fit each of the different scenes from the collection. So it was an interesting process, I think, both for Lotta and me, because I am very detail orientated. So I like to know, you know, on the 5th of March, this person will be wearing this with these socks, these shoes, that bra, that pair of Spanx, whatever. And I think this was just a much more fluid process because we didn't get the clothes. You know, we were rushing to get the clothes, to get to the set. And then the idea of it being about, a character and what they wore. But I think, however slightly chaotic it was at the end, I think the alchemy of all the different pieces just came together and it really feels logical.
Yeah, it's interesting because you made the film almost without even knowing that you were making it.
Yes.
And tell me about because the story is so compelling, and I love that you chose the 1920s and 30s and what you said about that it's sort of this in-between period where there was a lot of contrast, a lot of experimentation. What is the appeal for you
I think
in that decade?
I think that it's a really interesting period for women.
Yeah. And
by that period, kind of most of the inventions that we know today, apart from these magical boxes, the cell phone and the internet, were kind of invented. So we were in a kind of modern period, you know, even computers were invented. Sure, they're not what we know as computers today, but they're computers. And we were in a period of a lot of social freedom where you have women really starting to express themselves in so many areas of life, but at the same time there's kind of dark political forces on the horizon and a desire for the return to, in inverted commas, more traditional values. And I think that we find ourselves in a very similar period. I'm no politician, I'm not a social historian. I suppose I'm a woman who never thought I would live through many things I've lived through, whether it's COVID or, you know, the current political kind of climate. Like every day is a surprise. And I think that for people in the 20s and 30s, it was a very similar kind of time. And I think it's important because sometimes discomfort and changing time and tension can be really, I think, culturally and socially positive. It can push change for the better. And so I think you have to maintain an optimism and a joy, regardless of how bleak things may appear. And I think that's a lot of what the sort of creative expatriates coming to the south of France were doing in the 20s and 30s, is that they were facing, you know, a bleakness, whether it was Christopher Isherwood in the Greek islands or, you know, Fitzgerald, who holed up in France. It was a place of much greater social freedom here in France. You know, there were books that were banned in America you could read here, but at the same time Europe was going through huge political upheaval. So yes, I think it's about that dynamic. I'm getting very deep now, but I think it's about the dynamic between, on the one hand, you have to be really conscious of what's going on in the world, and at the same time you have to keep a sense of levity and joy and hopefulness, because that's our, like, what are we giving our children? What are we giving, Miu Miu is a youthful brand. What are we giving them if all we give is, we've already handed them something not too great? Yeah. I think we need to be focusing on some positivity as well.
Yeah. And I guess there is a sense of relief because in the movie, with these clothes, like you're looking back at the past and you speak about this tension, past and present. Is there, a sense of relief in looking at the past in some ways and thinking that they've gone through a similar time and there's like waves of changes, and I guess that's how I felt in a way looking at your movie.
Yeah, and I think too, like, the interesting thing about Upcycled, and when you talk about what the initiative is with Miu Miu, it's very much about taking garments from the past that have had a history and reinventing them for the present, giving them meaning and value now. And for me, that's a hopeful gesture, right? So I agree with everything you're saying, that it's not pretending to be, well, we've solved the problem of sustainability. It's about finding ways of taking things that would be discarded or forgotten and recreating them with value. And I love the idea that something as disposable as a t-shirt, with craft, main d'oeuvre, imagination, can become something that's precious and luxurious. And I think it is about the fact that the past, the cycle, that there is hope in the cycle. Yeah. Because if you're at the bottom, at some point you're going to be back in a better place, and you need to find some equilibrium in that constant change. What do they say? Plus ça change, plus c'est la même chose. And that ultimately upcycling things is about coming to terms with the past, accepting it, but also wanting to move on and be new and modern and change things. Yeah.
And you've always loved vintage, right? I think from early on, I've read that markets were a big part of your life, right?
I love historical clothing. I love the social history of clothes. So I'm a bit of a fashion history nerd. And I just think that in order to come to terms with our voracious appetite for clothes, like, the world has gone crazy. But I think that it's to do with the fact that getting dressed and creating a character for yourself every morning is a primal human urge. Like, I'm sure we were decorating ourselves before we painted cave walls. So if you have that primal urge, and then you have the ability to basically buy thousands of t-shirts on Shine, it's really difficult to contain it. So you have to kind of recognise that it is a basic human desire. Fashion has always existed. So we're all part of this incredible fashion cycle that we can't avoid. And we have to face it, and we have to find positive ways. And yes, circularity has its problems too, because if you're buying something off Vestiaire Collective and you're in Guatemala and you're getting it from Australia, you know what I mean? Of course. But we're all just trying. We're trying to find a language that we can understand and that we can change the way we do things.
And tell me about some of those 1920s codes and nautical style that's really referenced in the collection, and you've sort of reworked it for today.
So I think there's some extraordinary statistic that almost every single person in the world owns a pair of jeans. Can you imagine?
So interesting.
How many jeans that is. It's an extraordinary number. And what I thought was interesting is that we took these 20s ideas using white and black denim, totally disposable, and instead of being shackled to the form of the garment, it's all been cut up and re-patchworked into new shapes. So to me, I just find that really fascinating. So, for instance, we've made the Miu Miu design team and Miu Miu have made sort of wide-legged beach pyjama pants out of T-shirting that's bonded and re-patchworked together. So I love the fact that we've taken discardable items and reworked them in a completely modern and new way.
That was Catherine Martin, costume set designer and Miu Miu's latest collaborator. On the topic of summer, we're also getting ready for the new summer issue of Konfekt magazine, which is filled with sunny fashion and discovery brands from as far as Mexico City, Saint-Tropez and Noto, Italy. Deputy editor Chiara Rimella joined me in the studio to give us a preview.
So the tone is really interesting because for many issues, it was really just a sort of like a fashion shoot with stories, obviously, about the product. But over the past couple of issues, we've really tried to evolve the concept and bring in even more storytelling to it. So I look after kind of the featurey aspects of it. My favourite has to be a new regular, which is what we call civic style. So we dispatch a correspondent to a city and really just let them loose on the streets, trying to find stylish, people on the streets. But I think it's not just street style, it's also really understanding what makes the city tick sartorially. This issue we've gone to A Coruña, which fashion kind of insiders will know is the headquarters of Inditex, or nearby. There's a lot of fashion crowd actually in town, between those that work with Zara, with Massimo Dutti. And so that is sort of reflected in how stylish the people on the street are. But also I think Galicia in general is a very elegant corner of Spain. And it's interesting because climate-wise, because it's Atlantic, a day can really switch halfway through. So you it's a little bit like Britain in many respects. You head out in the morning and you think it's going to be really sunny, but you need to play with layering. And I think that's what we see in these pictures here. You just have people who have really embraced, the Atlantic circumstances and what that means for summer and beyond. Natalie, you were in charge of sort of picking a lot of the brands that ended up in our selection. Is there anything that stood out for you in terms of, new releases, exciting news?
I think it's a mix because, like you were saying, we want to feature brands that really have elements of storytelling. There's meaning behind the product and it's the highest quality. So there's brands that are very familiar with everyone that I really love for the summer, and I think we really captured it well. I think that kind of captures the spirit of summer in that way, but I also love some of the discovery brands that you will find in the tone. So La Veste is a brand based between Madrid and Paris. The founders are inspired by vintage clothing, and it's something that you'll see it really stands out on the page. Big colors, bright colors, and these terry fabrics that I think are perfect for summer.
What about the fashion features? Because you headed out somewhere pretty nice for one of the features.
Yeah, and that's thanks to you. So I think it's a story worth telling. It's a brand that we've discovered at the start of spring, actually, called La Pampa. Just launched but at Le Bon Marché by Audrey Pou, who is a journalist and an author, so quite established in the fashion world, but it's the first time that she ventured into making product. When I found out about it from Parisian editors and friends, I immediately thought that it would be perfect because she's inspired by Saint-Tropez and Ramatuelle, and then really it captures the spirit of summer, a lot of 1960s references as well. But I was kind of maybe thinking a little bit too practically, and saying I should just go and meet her in Paris, look at the clothes, get it over with in a way. But that's why I'm so grateful to you that you actually pushed me. You said, no, you have to go to Ramatuelle, and I got to spend 2 days exploring her beautiful house, which is kind of where it all started, and really experience that kind of south of France Mediterranean living that the brand is really kind of all about.
I think that's the important thing always for Konfekt, right? Like, the fashion stories that we frequently pick out will still be run frequently by kind of insiders who have a history in the big capitals in the world, but frequently they find themselves drawn to these other places. And I think that's where the interesting stories really kind of then unravel, because you find the person who used to work in Paris but has relocated to Corfu, or the main story in the fashion section is in Mexico City. You know, obviously obviously a city that's full of creatives, but where she's taking a real kind of craft-led approach to creating that does require time, that requires heaps of WhatsApp messages with artisans around the country, as any person who runs a fashion brand will know. But I think that's what I think makes, you know, Konfekt's approach to fashion so interesting, that we're always looking for that artisanal thread and perhaps the spots that you wouldn't have expected are home to incredible designers, but actually are.
And tell me a little bit more about the making of that story in Mexico City that features Carla Fernandez and her beautiful home, as well as looks from her summer collection.
Well, see, normally we run a feature that's called Fashion Road Trip in Konfekt, where we will go to a designer and then follow them to the atelier, as well as some of the places, the workshops where the clothes are actually made. Carla Fernandez works with so many artisans around the country. We sort of didn't even know where to begin, because really the network is so vast. So then she suggested we try to shoot at her house, and really, it's not just a house. It's an incredible brutalist-style property. So what ended up becoming the feature is this essentially full fashion shoot in her house that almost looks like a museum. So the clothes are speak so evidently of the way that they are made, that I think you get the tactility and you get the artisanship through them, because the embroidery is just so tactile. And our beloved contributor, Mary Holland, headed out to Mexico City, much as she lives in the States. She heads down to Mexico City happily and frequently for us.
So we've been to Italy, to Mexico City, to Saint-Tropez. We've also been to Cairo as part of this fashion section for our main fashion shoot, which, like the rest of the section, I think features this beautiful mix of the names that you will know, and also there's a lot of discovery. Tell me a little bit about your personal highlights from the Cairo shoot, and also this beautiful setting that it's in.
I love this shoot. Because it came about so organically. I was actually in Cairo doing another feature for Konfekt, and then I got the call from our editor saying, oh, actually, we're thinking about shooting main fashion out there. Could you maybe scout out a few locations? And it so happened that we had seen that this beautiful Art Deco building some apartments within it had been refurbished and turned into this kind of service apartments called Immobilia apartments, impeccably presented with all these kind of antiquities and, you know, beautiful furniture inside. So the story takes us to this glitzy apartment block, well, kind of faded now, obviously, but at the time of his home to all of the most important people in Cairo. And then a little bit on the streets of Cairo as well. My favourite look is the opening look. It's a wonderful kind of set by Brioni, but I love that it's paired with these really bold sunglasses by Makita and these incredible kind of almost bowl-like earrings by Boatk. It just feels so sort of like ready for adventure.
It's beautiful,
you know?
And I have to say I love the look right next to your pick, which is Chloe, because Shemena Kamali, the new creative director, has done such a beautiful job in reviving this idea of bohemian dressing, which couldn't be more fit for summer.
And then another sort of, out and about in town look for me, an amazing sort of belted kind of tunic by Loro Piana, just incredible. And I love this Fendi dress, a really deep kind of scoop neck, this red, fiery top with a sort of burgundy underneath. And again, I don't know, I think that we tried to capture both the essence of the season, but also somewhat translated into what it feels like to spend a few days in this amazing city with its soft colours, its kind of still standing kind of glamour. There is a sense of just like beautiful, texture to all of the buildings in Cairo. So I hope that we did it justice.
That was Chiara Rimella, Deputy Editor of Konfekt magazine. You can pick up a copy of the new issue on all good newsstands as of next week or subscribe online. And that's all for today's show. Make sure you stay tuned. We have more designer conversations coming very soon. Today's episode was produced and edited by Steph Chungu and Lily Austin. A big thank you to the entire Miu Miu team for a magical few days in Cannes. I'm Natalie Theodosi. Thank you for listening.